Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped off the military transport bus at Naval Station Norfolk. Her crisp uniform pressed to perfection despite the humid Virginia morning. At 25, she carried herself with quiet confidence, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. This assignment would either make or break her career in the Navy. The base buzzed with activity as sailors hurried between buildings, their conversations mixing with the distant sound of aircraft engines and ship horns from the harbor. Sarah adjusted her duffel bag and walked toward the administration building, unaware that several pairs of eyes were already watching her approach. Commander Jake Morrison stood at his office window on the second floor, observing the new arrival with interest. He had read her file extensively and knew what the other officers didn't. Sarah Chen was no ordinary recruit. Her academic records from the Naval Academy were exceptional, her leadership scores off the charts, and her recommendations came from some of the highest-ranking officials in the Navy. But Morrison also knew that potential meant nothing if it couldn't withstand the pressure cooker environment of a major naval base. "Sir, the new lieutenant is here for orientation," announced Petty Officer Williams as he knocked on Morrison's door. "Send her up in 10 minutes," Morrison replied, still watching as Sarah navigated through groups of sailors who seemed to deliberately slow her progress. Down in the courtyard, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez had already begun what he considered his unofficial welcoming committee. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who had seen countless young officers arrive with big dreams and bigger egos. In his experience, the best way to separate the wheat from the chaff was to apply immediate pressure. Well, what do we have here?" Rodriguez called out as Sarah approached the main entrance. "Another Academy graduate? Coming to show us enlisted folks how it's really done?" Sarah paused, recognizing the test for what it was. She had been warned about this kind of reception. "Chief Rodriguez, I presume?" "I'm Lieutenant Chen, reporting for duty." Rodriguez circled her slowly, his weathered face showing amusement. "Oh, you know my name already. Done your homework? Have you? Tell me, Lieutenant. What makes you think you can handle the real Navy after playing soldier at the Academy?" Several sailors had gathered to watch the exchange, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Sarah could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken challenge hanging in the humid air. "I don't think I can handle it, Chief," Sarah replied calmly. "I know I can, and I'm here to prove it through my actions, not my words." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly, impressed despite himself by her composure. "Actions? Huh, we'll see about that. The real Navy isn't like your textbooks, Lieutenant. Out here, people's lives depend on split-second decisions and years of experience." "I understand that completely, Chief. That's why I'm here to learn from sailors like you who have that experience." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "We'll see if you're still saying that after your first week. Williams, show the lieutenant to her quarters." As Sarah followed Petty Officer Williams through the maze of corridors, she could hear the conversations resuming behind her. Some voices carried skepticism, others outright dismissal. Williams, a young sailor who couldn't have been more than 20, glanced back at her nervously. "Don't take it personally, ma'am," he said quietly. "They test all the new officers like that." "I appreciate the heads up, Williams. How long have you been stationed here?" 3 years, ma'am. Started right out of boot camp. This place can be tough, but if you prove yourself, they'll have your back forever." They climbed 2 flights of stairs and walked down a long hallway lined with doors. The building was old, but well-maintained, with polished floors that reflected the fluorescent lighting. William stopped at door 247 and handed Sarah a key. "Your quarters, ma'am. Commander Morrison wants to see you in his office at 0900 hours." Sarah checked her watch. She had 30 minutes to get settled and review her notes. As Williams walked away, she unlocked her door and stepped into what would be her home for the next 2 years. The room was spartanly furnished but functional, with a single bed, desk, dresser, and small closet. A window overlooked the training grounds, where she could see sailors running in formation. Sarah set her duffel bag on the bed and pulled out a framed photo of her parents standing proudly at her academy graduation. Her father, a retired Marine colonel, had warned her that the transition from academy to active duty would be the most challenging part of her career. "The academy teaches you how to think like an officer," he had said, "but the fleet will teach you how to be one." Sarah unpacked quickly and efficiently, a skill drilled into her during 4 years at the Naval Academy. As she arranged her uniforms in the closet, she thought about the research she had done on this base. Naval Station, Norfolk was one of the largest naval installations in the world, home to dozens of ships and thousands of personnel. The competition here would be fierce, and the margin for error non-existent. At 0855 hours, Sarah knocked on Commander Morrison's office door. His voice called out for her to enter, and she stepped into a spacious office decorated with naval memorabilia and photographs from Morrison's 22-year career. Commander Morrison was a tall man with graying temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair across from his desk while he finished reading a document. "Lieutenant Chen," he began, setting the papers aside. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the warm welcome." Morrison smiled slightly, knowing she had already encountered Rodriguez's greeting committee. "I've reviewed your academy records extensively. Impressive academic performance, strong leadership evaluations, and glowing recommendations from your instructors. But as I'm sure you're aware, the real Navy is quite different from the academy environment." "I understand that, sir. I'm ready for the challenge." "Are you?" Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Because I'm going to be completely honest with you, Lieutenant. There are officers on this base who believe you were given this assignment because of political connections rather than merit. They think you're another academy graduate who will coast on reputation and family connections." Sarah felt a flash of anger, but kept her expression neutral. "Sir, I can assure you that I earned this position through my own efforts. I've never asked for special treatment, and I don't intend to start now." "I believe you," Morrison said. "But belief isn't enough in this business. You're going to have to prove it every single day. And some people here are going to make that as difficult as possible." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the bustling base below. "She's one of the finest officers I've ever served with. But she doesn't suffer fools gladly. If you can earn her respect, you'll have taken a major step forward. I won't disappoint you, sir." Morrison turned back to face her. "I hope not, Lieutenant, because despite what some people might think, I requested you specifically for this assignment. Your academy instructors spoke very highly of your strategic thinking and leadership potential. But potential means nothing if it can't be realized under pressure." The meeting concluded with Morrison providing Sarah with her schedule and introducing her to his aide, who would show her to the logistics department. As they walked across the base, Sarah noticed how other sailors watched her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open skepticism. The logistics building was a massive warehouse complex where supplies for dozens of ships were processed and distributed. The noise was overwhelming: forklifts moving pallets, workers shouting instructions, and the constant hum of conveyor belts and sorting machines. Commander Hayes was exactly what Sarah had expected from Morrison's description. A woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair and penetrating brown eyes. She commanded the logistics operation with military precision and obvious competence. When Sarah was introduced, Hayes looked her up and down like she was evaluating a piece of equipment. "So you're the academy hotshot everyone's been talking about," Hayes said without preamble. "I hope you're ready to work, Lieutenant, because we don't have time for hand-holding or on-the-job training." "I'm ready, ma'am." Hayes led Sarah through the warehouse, explaining the complex system that kept the base supplied and operational. Ships arrived daily with supply requests, and every item from food to ammunition had to be processed, cataloged, and distributed with perfect accuracy. "One mistake here," Hayes explained as they watched workers loading a truck bound for a destroyer, and sailors at sea could face shortages that put their lives at risk. "We don't accept mistakes, and we don't make excuses." Sarah was assigned to oversee the night shift inventory team, a job that Hayes explained was typically given to officers with much more experience. The night shift was notoriously difficult, with a crew that had developed its own culture and way of doing things. Your job, Hayes continued, is to maintain efficiency while ensuring accuracy. The night crew has been without permanent leadership for 6 weeks, and their performance has been slipping. I want you to fix it. As the day shift wound down, Sarah met her new team. The night shift supervisor was Petty Officer, First Class Maria Santos, a compact woman with calloused hands and suspicious eyes. Santos had been running the night shift informally since the previous officer had been transferred, and she clearly resented having her authority questioned by a young lieutenant fresh from the academy. "Ma'am," Santos said with barely concealed irritation, "we've been doing fine without an officer micromanaging every decision. My team knows their jobs." "There. Me." Sarah looked around at the team of 12 sailors, noting their body language and expressions. Some seemed curious about the new leadership, while others appeared openly hostile to any change in their routine. "I'm sure they do, Petty Officer Santos. My goal isn't to micromanage anyone. I'm here to support your team and help solve any problems that might be hindering your effectiveness." Santos laughed bitterly. "Problems? The only problem we have is officers who don't understand how things work in the real world. We've been hitting our targets without any academy graduate telling us how to do our jobs. The tension in the warehouse was thick enough to cut." Sarah realized that her first real test had arrived much sooner than expected. How she handled this confrontation would set the tone for everything that followed. The night stretched ahead, full of unknown challenges and opportunities to prove herself. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to begin the most important battle of her young career, earning the respect of sailors who had already decided she didn't deserve it. The warehouse fell silent, except for the hum of machinery as Sarah faced her first real challenge. Petty Officer Santos stood with her arms crossed, clearly expecting the new lieutenant to either back down or resort to pulling rank. The rest of the night shift watched with interest, waiting to see how their new officer would handle the confrontation. Sarah chose a different approach entirely. She walked over to a nearby computer terminal and pulled up the shift reports from the past 6 weeks. The numbers told a story that Santos probably hoped no one would notice. Productivity had indeed been maintained, but error rates had increased by 15%, and overtime costs were climbing steadily. "Petty Officer Santos, you're absolutely right that your team has been hitting targets," Sarah said, turning the screen so everyone could see the data. "But I'm also seeing some concerning trends that suggest we can do better together." Santos moved closer to look at the screen, her defensive posture softening slightly as she recognized the patterns Sarah was highlighting. "Ma'am, the error rate increase is because we've been short-staffed. 3 of our experienced workers got transferred last month." "That explains part of it," Sarah agreed. "What solutions have you tried to address the staffing shortage?" For the first time, Santos looked uncertain. "Well, we've been working extra hours to cover the gaps, but that leads to fatigue, which increases errors, which requires even more time to fix," Sarah finished. "It's a cycle that gets worse over time." One of the younger sailors, Seaman Johnson, spoke up hesitantly. "Ma'am, we tried to get temporary workers from other departments, but the paperwork kept getting rejected." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Show me the paperwork trail. I want to understand exactly where the process is breaking down." For the next hour, Sarah worked alongside the team to map out their workflow and identify bottlenecks. She asked questions instead of giving orders, listened more than she spoke, and demonstrated a genuine interest in understanding their challenges rather than simply asserting her authority. Gradually, the team began to warm to her approach. Santos, initially suspicious, found herself explaining complex inventory procedures and sharing insights gained from years of experience. Sarah took notes, asked follow-up questions, and showed respect for the knowledge that these enlisted sailors had accumulated through hands-on work. Around midnight, an urgent supply request came in from the USS Hampton, a submarine preparing for immediate deployment. The ship needed critical electronic components that had to be located, pulled from inventory, and delivered to the pier within 2 hours. "This is where things usually go wrong," Santos muttered as she pulled up the inventory system. "These emergency requests always come in the middle of the night, and the systems never seem to work properly when we need them most." Sarah watched as Santos navigated through multiple database screens, searching for the required components. The computer system was clearly outdated and user-unfriendly, requiring multiple login attempts and frequent system refreshes. "How often do you deal with emergency requests like this?" Sarah asked. "At least twice a week," replied Seaman Martinez, a quiet sailor who had been watching Sarah carefully all evening. "Sometimes more. Ships get last-minute deployment orders, and suddenly they need parts that weren't on their original requisition lists." Sarah could see the stress building among the team members as they struggled with the bulky computer system. Santos was becoming increasingly frustrated, typing commands with sharp, angry keystrokes while muttering under her breath about incompetent IT departments. "What if we approach this differently?" Sarah suggested. "Instead of fighting with the main system, could we use the backup inventory database to cross-reference locations?" Santos paused her typing and looked at Sarah with surprise. "Ma'am, how do you know about the backup system? Most officers don't even know it exists." "I studied the base technical manuals during my orientation period," Sarah replied. "I wanted to understand all the systems before I started making decisions about how to use them." The admission seemed to impress the team. Santos nodded slowly and pulled up the backup system, which was indeed faster and more reliable than the primary database. Within minutes, they had located all the required components, but finding the parts was only half the battle. The warehouse was enormous, and locating specific items in the maze of shelves and storage areas could take hours without proper coordination. Sarah watched as the team began to spread out, each person heading to different sections without any apparent plan. "Wait," Sarah called out. "Before we scatter, let's coordinate this properly. Santos, who knows the warehouse layout best?" "Johnson and Martinez have been here the longest," Santos replied. "They could probably find anything in this place, blindfolded." Sarah quickly organized the team into efficient search pairs, with experienced sailors guiding newer team members to the correct locations. She also assigned specific roles: one person to handle paperwork, another to coordinate with the delivery truck, and a third to maintain communication with the submarine's supply officer. The transformation was remarkable. What had started as a potentially chaotic scramble became a precisely coordinated operation. Team members communicated efficiently, shared resources, and covered for each other when needed. Sarah moved between groups, offering support and removing obstacles rather than trying to control every detail. Within 90 minutes, all components had been located, verified, and loaded onto the delivery truck. The submarine's supply officer called to confirm receipt and express his appreciation for the quick turnaround. As the team took a brief break, Santos approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "Ma'am, I have to admit, I wasn't expecting that kind of response to an emergency. Most officers either panic and start giving orders, or they disappear and let us handle everything ourselves." "I figured you knew your jobs better than I did," Sarah replied. "My role was to help you do those jobs more effectively, not to take over and try to do them myself." The rest of the night shift passed smoothly, with the team working together to complete their regular inventory tasks while maintaining the improved coordination they had discovered during the emergency. Sarah spent time with each team member, learning about their backgrounds, understanding their career goals, and identifying ways she could help them develop professionally. She learned that Seaman Johnson was studying for advancement exams but struggled with the technical mathematics sections. Martinez had ideas for improving the warehouse organization but had never had anyone willing to listen. Santos herself was dealing with personal stress because her husband was deployed and she was raising 2 young children alone while working the demanding night shift. By the time the day shift began arriving, Word had already spread about the successful emergency supply mission. Commander Hayes appeared shortly after 0700 hours, clearly having heard reports about the night's activities. "Lieutenant Chen," Hayes said, her expression unreadable. "I understand. There was some excitement last night." "Yes, ma'am. Emergency supply request from the Hampton. The team handled it exceptionally well." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "The team handled it? From what I heard, you completely reorganized their response procedures." Sarah glanced at Santos, who was still within earshot. "Actually, ma'am, the team already had all the knowledge and skills they needed. I just helped coordinate their efforts more effectively." Hayes studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Interesting approach. How did the rest of the shift go?" Creeding growl. "Very well, ma'am. The team exceeded their productivity targets while maintaining accuracy standards. I think we've identified some process improvements that could benefit all shifts." "Process improvements? Already?" Hayes looked skeptical. "You've been here exactly 1 day." "Lieutenant." "Yes, ma'am. But the team members have been here for years. They're the real experts on what works and what doesn't. I just listened to their insights and helped implement some of their suggestions." Hayes walked over to Santos, who was completing the shift change paperwork. "Petty Officer, what's your assessment of last night's performance?" Santos looked between Hayes and Sarah before responding. "Ma'am, it was the smoothest night shift we've had in months. Lieutenant Chen didn't try to change everything at once or prove she was in charge. She worked with us instead of just giving orders." After Hayes left to review the detailed shift reports, Santos approached Sarah as she prepared to head to her quarters for some sleep. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," Santos said. "I came into last night expecting another academy graduate who would try to impress everyone by throwing their weight around. I was ready for a fight." No apology necessary, Petty Officer. You were protecting your team and maintaining standards. That's exactly what a good leader should do." Santos smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "If you don't mind me saying so, ma'am, you're different from most officers. You actually listen when people talk. I learned a long time ago that the smartest person in any room is usually the one asking questions, not the one providing all the answers." As Sarah walked back to her quarters through the morning bustle of the base, she reflected on the lessons of her first night. The technical challenges had been manageable, but the real test had been earning the trust and respect of experienced sailors who had every reason to be skeptical of her abilities. She knew that one successful shift didn't prove anything in the long term. The real measure of her leadership would come over weeks and months of consistent performance, as she helped her team tackle increasingly complex challenges while developing their individual skills and advancing their careers. But as she fell asleep in her narrow bunk, Sarah felt confident that she had taken the first crucial step in what would be a long journey toward proving herself worthy of the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. Meanwhile, word of the night shift's success was spreading through other departments, carried by the informal communication networks that existed in any large organization. Some officers were impressed by Sarah's collaborative approach, while others remained skeptical, waiting to see if she could maintain such performance under more difficult circumstances. Unknown to Sarah, her actions were being carefully observed and evaluated by people much higher up the command structure than Commander Hayes. Her performance reports were being forwarded to offices in the Pentagon, where senior officials were tracking the progress of promising young officers who might someday be selected for the most important leadership positions in the Navy. The real test of her character and capabilities was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Sarah's arrival at Naval Station Norfolk, and her reputation had grown considerably throughout the base. The logistics department was running more efficiently than it had in years, and her innovative approaches to problem-solving had caught the attention of senior officers across multiple departments. But not everyone was pleased with her rapid rise in influence and respect. Lieutenant Commander Brad Hawkins, a 10-year veteran who had expected to be given leadership of the logistics department, watched Sarah's success with growing resentment. He had friends throughout the base who shared his belief that academy graduates were given unfair advantages over officers who had worked their way up through the ranks. The opportunity for Hawkins to challenge Sarah's position came during a major training exercise designed to test the base's response to a simulated attack. The scenario called for rapid evacuation of critical supplies while maintaining operational readiness for the ships and aircraft stationed at Norfolk. Commander Morrison gathered all department heads for the pre-exercise briefing, explaining that this would be the most complex training scenario the base had conducted in 5 years. Multiple agencies would participate, including Coast Guard, Marine Corps, and civilian emergency responders. The success of this exercise, Morrison emphasized, will depend entirely on coordination and communication between departments. Any breakdown in the supply chain could result in mission failure and potential casualties in a real-world scenario. Sarah had spent weeks preparing her logistics team for exactly this type of challenge. She had cross-trained personnel from different shifts, established backup communication protocols, and developed contingency plans for various emergency scenarios. Her team was as ready as any group could be for the unknown challenges ahead. But Hawkins had been working behind the scenes to ensure that Sarah would face obstacles that would expose what he believed were her fundamental weaknesses as a leader. He had convinced several other department heads that the exercise would be a perfect opportunity to test whether the young lieutenant could handle real pressure. The exercise began at 0500 hours, with simulated explosions and emergency alerts echoing across the base. Sarah's team immediately implemented their emergency response procedures, with different groups handling specific aspects of the supply chain evacuation. Everything proceeded smoothly for the first 2 hours. Critical supplies were being moved to secure locations, vehicles were being loaded efficiently, and communication systems were functioning perfectly. Sarah moved between different operational areas, monitoring progress and solving problems as they arose. Then Hawkins made his move. Using his connections with the base communications center, he arranged for the logistics department's primary computer systems to be temporarily disabled, simulating a cyber attack that would disrupt inventory tracking and supply coordination. This was not part of the original exercise plan, but Hawkins convinced the exercise controllers that it would provide valuable training in crisis adaptation. Sarah first became aware of the problem when Santos contacted her via radio from the main warehouse. "Ma'am, we've lost all computer access," Santos reported, her voice tense but controlled. "None of our tracking systems are working, and we can't access inventory databases or shipping manifests." Sarah felt a momentary surge of panic, but quickly suppressed it. This was exactly the kind of scenario she had hoped to avoid. But it was also an opportunity to demonstrate the backup systems and manual procedures her team had practiced. "Copy that, Santos. Implement Manual Protocol 3 immediately. Johnson and Martinez should start distributing the printed backup manifests we prepared and shift everyone to paper-based tracking until we can restore computer access." What Sarah didn't know was that Hawkins had also arranged for several key personnel to be temporarily pulled away from the logistics department for urgent assignments with other departments. These were experienced sailors, whose knowledge would be crucial for manual operations. Within 30 minutes, Sarah realized the scope of the challenge she was facing. Not only had she lost computer access, but 3 of her most experienced team members had been reassigned just as the exercise reached its most critical phase. But instead of becoming flustered or demanding that her people be returned, Sarah adapted her strategy. She quickly reorganized the remaining team members, pairing inexperienced personnel with veterans who could provide guidance and support. She also reached out to other departments to request temporary assistance, offering to reciprocate when they faced their own challenges during the exercise. Commander Hayes, who was monitoring the logistics response from the exercise command center, watched with growing admiration as Sarah's team continued to function effectively, despite the artificial obstacles that had been created. "How is she managing this?" Hayes asked Morrison, who was also observing the exercise with keen interest. "Watch her decision-making process," Morrison replied. "She's not trying to control every detail or prove that she can handle everything herself. She's adapting her leadership style to match the circumstances." Indeed, Sarah had shifted into a completely different mode of leadership. Instead of coordinating from a central location, she began moving constantly between different operational areas, providing hands-on assistance wherever it was needed most. When a forklift broke down in the middle of a critical supply transfer, she grabbed tools and helped with the repairs. When a communication breakdown occurred between the warehouse and loading docks, she physically carried messages until the radio problem could be resolved. Her team responded to this hands-on leadership with increased effort and creativity. Sailors began suggesting solutions to problems they encountered, rather than waiting for orders from above. The manual tracking system, which should have been cumbersome and error-prone, operated smoothly because everyone understood their role and felt empowered to make decisions within their areas of responsibility. By noon, Hawkins realized that his plan was backfiring. Instead of exposing Sarah's weaknesses, the artificial challenges were highlighting her strengths as a leader and the exceptional preparation of her team. Word was spreading throughout the base about the logistics department's performance under adversity. Frustrated and desperate to create a more serious problem, Hawkins convinced the exercise controllers to introduce one final scenario: a simulated fire in the main warehouse that would require immediate evacuation of all personnel and supplies. The fire alarm sounded at 1,330 hours, just as Sarah's team was completing a major supply transfer to 3 different ships. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a manageable challenge. But, combined with the computer outage and personnel shortage, it threatened to create genuine chaos. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. Instead of panicking or trying to save everything, she quickly prioritized the most critical supplies and organized an orderly evacuation that put personnel safety first. She assigned specific responsibilities to team leaders, established a command post outside the warehouse, and implemented the emergency communication procedures they had practiced. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. Word of the logistics department's challenges had spread throughout the base, and sailors from other departments began arriving to offer assistance. Chief Rodriguez, the same man who had challenged Sarah on her first day, appeared with a team of volunteers from the maintenance department. "Lieutenant," Rodriguez said, slightly out of breath from running across the base, "my people know this warehouse as well as anyone. Where do you need us? Where do you need us?" Similar offers came from the communications department, the motor pool, and even the base medical staff. Officers and enlisted personnel who had initially been skeptical of Sarah's capabilities now volunteered their time and expertise to help her succeed. Commander Morrison, watching from the exercise command center, turned to Captain Elizabeth Reeves, the base commanding officer, who had been quietly observing the entire scenario. "Captain, I think there's something you should know about Lieutenant Chen's background," Morrison said quietly. Captain Reeves, a distinguished woman in her 50s, who had commanded ships and shore installations throughout her career, looked at Morrison with interest. "Oh? Her father is Colonel James Chen, former Marine Corps Commandant. Her mother is Dr. Patricia Chen, former Secretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Lieutenant Chen is literally Navy royalty, but she's never used her connections or asked for special treatment." Captain Reeves studied the monitors showing Sarah's response to the simulated emergency. "And she chose to serve under her maiden name to avoid any appearance of favoritism?" "Exactly. She wanted to be judged solely on her own merits, without any influence from her family's reputation." "Interesting. And what's your assessment of her performance so far?" Morrison smiled. "Captain, I've been in the Navy for over 20 years, and I've never seen a young officer demonstrate this level of strategic thinking combined with practical leadership skills. She's not just managing her department. She's building relationships and creating capabilities that will benefit the entire base." By 1600 hours, the exercise was officially concluded, and the results were remarkable. Despite facing multiple artificial challenges that had not been part of the original scenario, the logistics department had successfully completed all required tasks while maintaining safety standards and operational efficiency. But the real story emerged during the after-action review, when exercise observers revealed the additional obstacles that had been introduced specifically to test Sarah's response to adversity. Captain Reeves addressed the assembled officers during the debrief session. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed today was not just excellent performance under pressure, but a demonstration of leadership that transformed challenges into opportunities for growth and collaboration. She looked directly at Sarah, who was sitting with her team in the back of the briefing room. Lieutenant Chen, your response to today's scenarios exceeded all expectations. But more importantly, you demonstrated the kind of leadership that builds trust, develops capabilities, and creates lasting positive change in an organization. The briefing room was silent as Captain Reeves continued. I've received reports about your performance over the past 3 months, and I've been impressed by your approach to leadership and your commitment to developing your team. Today's exercise confirmed something that some of us have suspected for a while. Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and confusion as Captain Reeves paused. The Navy is planning to promote several exceptional young officers to positions of increased responsibility much earlier than the traditional timeline. These accelerated promotions are reserved for officers who demonstrate extraordinary potential for senior leadership roles. Captain Reeves smiled as she delivered the news that would change Sarah's career trajectory forever. Lieutenant Chen, effective immediately. You are promoted to Lieutenant Commander and will be assuming responsibility for all logistics operations at this base. Furthermore, you've been selected for the Navy's Advanced Leadership Development Program, which has produced the last 3 fleet admirals. The briefing room erupted in applause, led by Santos, Johnson, Martinez, and the rest of Sarah's team. Even Chief Rodriguez was clapping enthusiastically, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by genuine admiration. But perhaps the most significant response came from Lieutenant Commander Hawkins, who approached Sarah after the ceremony with a mixture of respect and embarrassment on his face. Lieutenant Commander Chen, he said formally, I owe you an apology. I was responsible for some of the additional challenges you faced today, and I was wrong to test you that way. Sarah looked at him thoughtfully before responding. Brad, I appreciate your honesty. But you know what? Those challenges made me and my team better. Sometimes the best growth comes from the most difficult circumstances. Hawkins nodded gratefully. I'd like to request assignment to your department, if you'll have me. I think I could learn a lot from your leadership style. As Sarah walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from academy graduate to rising star in just 3 months. The challenges had been real, the pressure intense, and the stakes high. But she had proven to herself and others that she possessed the qualities necessary for senior leadership. More importantly, she had learned that true leadership wasn't about proving her own capabilities, but about developing the potential in others and creating environments where everyone could contribute their best efforts toward shared goals. The next morning, Sarah would begin her new role with expanded responsibilities and a team that had grown from 12 night shift workers to over 200 personnel across multiple departments. The challenges ahead would be even greater. But she faced them with confidence gained through adversity and the knowledge that she had earned her position through merit, dedication, and the trust of the sailors she was privileged to lead. Years later, when Admiral Sarah Chen looked back on her remarkable career, she would trace its foundation to those first crucial months at Naval Station Norfolk, where a young lieutenant learned that the greatest measure of a leader's success is not personal achievement, but the success and growth of the people they have the honor to serve alongside.